So, Thanasis Cambanis, thank you so much for talking to us today. You have done a lot of reporting in interesting and different parts of the world, especially, I guess, in the Middle East, but also in the US. And it goes all the way back to your college career at UNC, where you were editor of the Daily Journal. So I know that you have a lot of experience to bring to bear. And before you're even a reporter, though, you're also a news consumer. And I was wondering if you would talk to us just briefly about what you look for when a story comes across your radar that you don't have a lot of background for, you don't necessarily know the people or the reporter or the place that's involved. What do you look for in deciding what to believe?
Well, there's a couple of tells that I rely on as a reader, and some of these are things that are actually much more difficult to rely on than they were in the past. But the first thing is I look at the actual tone and language in the piece that I'm reading or watching or listening to if it's audio, and I have my ears out for language that sounds hectoring, ideological, rhetorical. If I hear or read language that sounds like I'm being bullied or being persuaded or a lot of assumptions are being made, then I'm automatically suspicious. I feel like the outlet is more preoccupied with trying to prove a point or convince me of something than they are in telling me whatever it is that they've reported or verified. The second thing, which has changed a lot in a short period of time, is simply developing trust in various publications. In some cases, we can tell that something is suspicious, or that we shouldn't, look to it as a simply accurate account of what it purports to be accounting. But in other cases, we can't know, especially with outlets that have professional language or production values. And so we come to develop trust in them over time. So we follow the way they cover things that we do know about, whether it's local news or national politics or some body of it or some story that we follow in multiple outlets, and we referee their work. And if we come to view them as credible, then we trust them on things where we don't know anything about the subject matter. That was a kind of approach that worked well in an era where one might read a local newspaper and listen to one radio station and watch one network. But nowadays, I think I, like most of us, get my news from so many different sources, often curated by people I know loosely via Twitter or other social media sites. And so I'm on a daily basis clicking on stories in outlets that I might read once a month or once every 2 months or have never seen before. And in those cases, what I've ended up resorting to is just a very low level of trust in everything I read, including a lot of work that's in outlets that I generally trust. But I've just raised my filter and lowered my expectation of accuracy. So if something's really important, I make sure I see it in multiple places before I assume it to be true.
And then there's another whole really important level of deciding what to believe in your work as a reporter. So you're constantly talking to people, reading reports of events, scanning Twitter feeds, gathering information all kinds of ways. And you have to decide who is sharing a valid perspective, who's telling something that you consider to be truth. How do you scope that out?
I mean, this is a lifetime endeavor, right? Trying to figure out how to ascertain truth claims, how to figure out how much to trust people you're interviewing, and then also how to very carefully qualify what you know and what you're not sure of to your readers. So there's a whole lot of elements to what I would say is the sort of honorable way to pursue the project of figuring out how much you know, and then sharing that with an audience. As a reporter, in most cases where the news is really important, so I'm thinking war coverage or White House coverage, or let's say the behavior of a large multinational corporation that has different self-interests than, say, we do as their the consumers of their products, we're often operating in a context where the most powerful entities on the playing field either aren't telling the truth or hiding the truth, or have every incentive to allow a semi-accurate narrative to prevail. So we're dealing with people who are actively misleading us. Sometimes they're lying. Sometimes they're just pursuing their own perceived self-interest in an adversarial, courtroom-like approach. And in any case, we're left, we the least resourced parties to the conversation, the journalists and the readers, or the reporters, bloggers, and the people who have maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes of time to think about what happened and what's true. So we're the weak parties in this encounter, and we're trying to figure out, so what is the truth? As a reporter, there's only one good way to do this, and we don't always have recourse to it. But the good way to do this is to spend a lot of time pursuing real investigative reporting to ascertain what happened. So that means, if the hardest stories sometimes on this are petty local news stories. I've faced this as a reporter covering the town council in Chapel Hill, or the UNC administration, as a young reporter. And then I faced this covering the U.S. military occupation of Iraq, let's say, or the war in Syria. So whether the stakes are really large or really small, it's you have to sort out these kinds of competing truth claims. And when it's a small local story, there's a lot of pressure from the people you're talking to, because you know them, you'll see them again. And if you feel like they're hiding something from you or not telling you the truth, it's actually much harder than it would be, say, in the White House press room, or, while facing a U.S. military commander, to say, hey, that sounds like a lie. Can you show me some proof? Can you show me a document? Can you show me your records? Can I look in your computer? I'm a taxpayer. I have the right. These are difficult kinds of confrontations to do, and they take a lot of resources. What often ends up happening is there just isn't time, right? Or there isn't personnel, or there isn't enough. Let's say you're a volunteer blogger who covers the school board in your town, and you're doing this already for free in your own time. You go to the school board meeting, you hear something that sounds like it's probably not true, but you don't have 2 days to go and track down the truth. So you write a story and you say the school board member said, that there wasn't enough money to pay for the school renovation, let's say. And, some parent stood up and said the opposite, and who knows, he said, she said. The fundamental guiding principle here is that in most cases there is an actual truth, right? This isn't, sometimes on very complicated policy questions, there's not a fact, right? There's different opinions, and you can never really say who's right. But on most things, affairs of public interest, most things in the news that people care about, even frivolous things, have a truth. The person either got drunk and drove their car into a electric pole, or they didn't. The person either embezzled the money or they didn't. There either are 1,000 American soldiers in Syria, or there aren't, and so on. These are knowable facts, and somebody knows them. Usually, in the case of American news, someone in the American government has the evidence that could answer the question. How many crimes were committed in a certain area, how many drugs were intercepted in a certain county. The information exists, so it's just a matter of getting our hands on it. And we're operating in a climate where a lot of work has been done to muddy the waters, just in general, right? To muddy the waters about whether there is a truth about anything. So there's a really pernicious industry, and this comes, it comes from advertising, it comes from politics, it comes from criminals, it comes from well-intentioned entertainment industry people. There's a lot of different forces that conspire to create this idea that you can't ever really know what's going on, because there's always hidden interests, and there's always another story, another side of the story, story underneath the obvious story, and so there's a sort of cultural let's say, assumption that anyway there isn't some kind of true narrative, so it's all just which piece do you want to believe, or how much time do you have for it. And that's our work as writers and as journalists and as chroniclers, and often as teachers, is to work against that, and to say, there is, in many of these cases, an actual answer. There is a set of facts that are incontrovertible. We can find them, and in the cases where we can't find them, we can still insist that truth is there, even if it's been successfully hidden from us for now. There is an answer. There is a dollar amount for the value of Apple, let's say, and there is a number of workers in China who work for Apple putting together iPhones, right? And that number has been counted by Apple. Whether they want to hide that number from us or not, it exists. It's a truth, and I find that to be a very difficult challenge in our times, because because of the complexity of the media environment, because of the sophistication of our of audiences, and because of the limits and competing pressures on our attention.
Very interesting. And I suppose that, have there been times when you were reporting on a story and operating on an understanding of the truth that turned out to be completely mistaken?
Oh, there are so many examples of that, and right now the example that pops to my mind is an opposite example, which I talk about a lot when I teach people who want to do war reporting. So I'll tell you that example first, and then maybe another one will come to my mind. But when I was covering the first year of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, so 2003 to 2004, when I first arrived there as a reporter, my what I had been trained to do and what made sense to me was to sort of assume nothing and investigate everything. So if someone tells you something, even if it sounds crazy, check it. Maybe it's true. You don't want to miss an important story just because it seems like it's not likely. So when I first arrived, I heard on a daily basis really explosive accusations of abuses and misbehavior by U.S. soldiers. So every day I would hear stories of soldiers torturing and killing people at checkpoints, for example, and it seemed implausible to me, but I did what I thought my job was, and I reported those stories out, and uniformly none of them turned out to be true. So this unfolded over a period of, let's say, 6 months. So I was doing a lot of other reporting in Iraq and many other stories. This kept coming up. It seemed important, and eventually I said, okay, this isn't something that's happening, and I'm going to stop checking these kinds of tips, because they're not true. So people are angry at the Americans, and understandably, America is making all kinds of other well-documented mistakes and committing all kinds of bad actions in Iraq. They're not committing these types of bad actions. So I'm going to stop reporting those stories. A few months later, I started working on a story about conditions inside the American prison camps where they were detaining Iraqis. And the story tip that I was working on was that a lot of men who were being arrested and going to these American prisons were actually being recruited into militia groups while in prison. So that was what I had heard this from a couple of people. That seemed like an interesting story. So I interviewed dozens of men who had just come out of American prison camps about this hypothesis. And many of them told me atrocious stories of abuse inside these American facilities. And I said, first of all, I'm doing a story about something else, but okay, I sort of heard them out, and I just chalked it down in my mind to the same stream of rumors that I had checked that were unfounded about abuse at checkpoints, and I did not follow up on it. And I had probably 10 men tell me stories, and eventually I read in the New Yorker about the torture and abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib by American soldiers, documented in photographs taken by the Americans themselves, and it had been compiled by I think the U.S. military investigators and leaked to Congress and eventually to a reporter. It turned out to all be true. Worse than anything that had been alleged to me. And that, so twice in a row, I had this sort of boomerang, one, on the same issue, where first I had believed people who were making things up, and then I had disbelieved people who were telling me the truth. There's countless similar examples to this in other formats, in other situations. What it tells you is, one, people can lie about the damnedest of things, right? People can lie about things that you're shocked at the immorality that they would make something up about something as important as what they'll lie about. And on the other hand, people will have the most unbelievable things happen to them, and when they tell you the truth about it, it's not believable because we're limited by what makes sense to us. And in that context, in 2003, the winter of 2003 to 2004, it didn't seem believable to me that there'd be an endemic torture conducted by Americans in that setup. And it turns out not only was that normal there, but it turns out today that's a sadly a very normalized part of our perception of what happens in American facilities around the world. So for me, it's a very humbling lesson that even in a well-meaning situation in which I was questioning my own biases, I was trying with only limited success to make sure I wasn't limiting my reporting just based on what I already knew, and being open to investigating other possibilities. And yet reality, and it wasn't the last time, reality far exceeded my limited expectations of what might be possible. And the news, the real proven news ended up being something far beyond my reporter's imagination. And I think we have to keep that in mind on any story that any news story that we're paying attention to.
It sounds like the truth is always a work in progress.
Well, the truth is not a work in progress. Our knowledge of it is a work in progress, right? I mean, in most cases, again, the truth is just there out of reach. And if we, work hard for it, we can find it. Now, what's one of the things that's hard is, what do you do in the many situations where you just for a long period of time can't yet know what really happened. And this is the case with a lot of the political stories going on in the United States right now, where there is a verifiable truth to what happened or didn't happen, but we don't know it yet. So we have to somehow believe what we believe now, but be patient and open to having our beliefs revised by new information. And I think that's very difficult for most people. And okay, many people in the world aren't interested in that to begin with, right? They jump to a conclusion about what they think happened, whether it's in Iraq and Syria with Donald Trump, at the border with their local official who they either think is corrupt or they think is great. So their mind is made up, and no set of facts or information is going to change what they think. So that's actually a significant chunk of people. But then there are lots and lots of other people who are well-intentioned and who have an opinion, but are willing to revise it if new information comes out, right? They'll like Richard Nixon, but when they find out about Watergate, they're willing to say he's a crook and I don't like him anymore, or whatever. And for those people, how do those people are us? How do we critically judge the limited information we have and act on it, and at the same time remain open to the possibility that our perception could be wrong? Either we came to the wrong conclusion or we didn't have enough information, and when we get more, it turns out the person we trusted was a liar, or the policy that we thought was working doesn't work. And this kind of reporting is really hard too, because it's not just about a simple thing like, is this person a war criminal or is this person a crook? It might be like, we have a policy to incarcerate drug criminals, and that policy was created because of a set of circumstances, 20 years ago. And now, can we look at the data that we have available and decide whether this works? And if you're invested in that particular policy, one way or another, can you judge it accurately the way you would try and judge accurately something like your own finances, right? If you're looking at your own personal budget, you would presumably be open to correcting your perception when you realize you're spending more money than you have, let's say, or that you can't afford the car you want to buy. Can you do that about something like, mandatory minimum sentences for drug dealers, or keeping troops in Syria? And that runs very contra to human nature. And I think reporters have a real role to play when they want to, in encouraging people to reserve judgment and open themselves to new ideas. But I don't think most journalism outlets practice that kind of constant revision and self-criticism and openness to new narratives. So the media we consume, wherever it stands on the political spectrum, or even the media that's excellent and as neutral as possible, all of it cultivates a tone of authority, a tone of certainty, which is fundamentally at odds with the way the actual world we live in works, which is the world is ambiguous and our perceptions ought to be constantly revised by new information, right? We should be approaching news the way we scientists approach hypotheses through the scientific method. You test your assumptions, you come to a conclusion, and then you test it again and again forever. And in science, the things that everyone accepts to be true are called theories, right? They're not called facts. So the theory of gravity, the theory of relativity, and that makes a lot of sense because it's the best of our knowledge rather than an absolute truth. And our media coverage of especially complicated things like politics and human life comes across with a level of absolute certainty that is just, I think, nonsensical.
But as a reporter, you do want to be believed when you write your stories. You want us as news consumers to accept, I think, the story you're telling. And I'm wondering how I get that authority is elusive and perhaps never as complete as we would like it to be. But I wonder, how do you go about writing a story and, creating a reasonable basis for news consumers to accept what you're saying?
Well, so there's a lot of work and thought that goes into creating credibility, let's say, for reporting, and I think media outlets actually have not kept up with the modern news consumers' level of scrutiny and knowledge of methods. So in the old days, 25 years ago, it was enough to say CBS News has reported or the New York Times says, and it was a fact, and in fact, other journalists would then build on that as if it were a gospel truth. Now, there's less of the sort of voice of God based credibility, where simply by invoking your identity, you get authority. And my personal view of this is not universally shared. I think that the correct approach here is to qualify our arguments. So in other words, act a little less certain and sure in our tone about everything, and show our work, right? So we need to do a lot more, which means spending, let's say, 20% of our words in a story or 20% of our screen time in a video saying how we got the story. Why are we reporting about this particular conflict in this particular town in Syria? Is it because it's the most important thing that's happening in that whole country that day, or is it because it's the only place in Syria right now that has access to telephones or the internet, and therefore can tell us what's happening there? And I think if we say these things, if we say like, hey, we've been in touch every day with people in 40 towns in Syria, and this is the first time in a week we're writing a story because this is the first time that there's been a major flare-up like this that has killed a bunch of people. You'll say as a reader, oh, okay, so you're doing a lot of work being in touch with, what did you say here? 40 different people in 40 different towns. So if you tell me that what's happening in this town today is a big deal, and here's why, I might be more likely to trust you because you've told me what the background work you've been doing is. I think journalists are often afraid to talk about the messiness of how they get stories because they think people will trust them less. But I actually think the opposite is true. As it is, the public doesn't trust journalists nearly as much as they used to. And I think polls and research show a long arc of eroding trust. So at worst, showing our work won't make a difference, and at best, it will go a long way towards ascertaining for our readers how we know what we know. I mean, there's a lot of surprising research that shows that readers and audiences don't realize where reporters have been. So a reporter will go to a frontline town in Iraq and write a dispatch about the fight against the Islamic State. And a reader will think that the reporter reported it from Washington, D.C. And, that's not because the reader is stupid. That's because something about the way we frame and package these stories fails to make clear that a human reporter went to Mosul and rode around in an unarmored car while people were shooting at them and got this news for you. So we need to put that kind of information in our stories. How did we get the story? And then we also need to put what I was saying before, why we decided this was important. Because if we don't, then we are subject constantly to accusations of having an axe to grind, promoting certain stories because of an ideological agenda, or simply, being lazy and just running with what we happen to know. So if we show our work, then we're somewhat inoculated against those charges, and we're entering a conversation with our readers about how we find things out. And our readers start to realize that, there's a lot of work that goes into verifying the information in stories, finding the people, the experts we talk to, finding the officials who leak or share information with us, and then readers maybe will trust that information more.
And there's a lot of work even afterwards that goes into the editing process. I think in the kind of publications that you work with, which is one of the things that really distinguishes the serious and believable publications from the ones spouting fiction or heavily skewed information. Could you talk to us a little bit about what the editing process is like? What happens to a story that you submit after you're finished with it and somebody else gets started with it?
Well, so a high quality journalism outlet spends probably a week's worth of person hours for one 1,000 word story that you read in 4 or 5 minutes. And there's a tremendous amount of work, and also on the front end, not just on the back end. So if you are, let's say, a wire reporter in Baghdad, and you're deciding what you're going to write about and report about, you do a whole bunch of interviews and you go to events, and then you speak to an editor or multiple editors about what you're doing, and you make a series of decisions about what is going to be the story that you write that day. And so several hours of thought and discussion among multiple people to make a judgment call of, I found out 30 things. What is actually worth sharing with our readers? And once you make that decision, you go back and do several hours more reporting. So you're not just reading some tweets and putting them together, right? So before we even get to a draft of the story, we have several people's thinking going into it, and maybe dozens of hours of work. Once a story draft is written, depending on the outlet, anywhere from 1 to 3 editors will read the story. They do things like fact check, demand further reporting. Often they do further reporting and research of their own to confirm facts in the stories. Most errors in stories are caught at this stage. So again, professional, competent, well-meaning reporters still make mistakes, because it's, there's probably 100 facts in a 1,000 word story, or more if you count the facts that are built into underlying assumptions but not written in the text. So this is it's like a legal document. Every sentence has to be completely correct, and professionals who are editors and reporters are really dedicated to that being done right, and they vet and edit every word in these stories, and then finally it gets published. And often that editing process takes as long as the writing process. So on a simple story, we might talk about a day of reporting, a day of writing, and a day of editing, where 3 to 5 reporters and editors are involved in that process. And then there might be a whole secondary layer of editors who look into packaging the story, reporting, doing visual reporting, photographs, videos that accompany it, figuring out how to package and present it and design it on a website. So all that is being done by people who've read with a lot of scrutiny every word in that story before it ever gets to you.
Does that ever get incredibly annoying? Like, I think from a student teacher perspective, not everybody loves being challenged about every single sentence they write.
I mean, it's no doubt it's a tedious process for all concerned, but it makes for a much better result. I've been in editorial processes that are like the one I described, and then I've been in new media outlets where I'm asked to write a piece. I write it in 2 hours, and then it gets posted 2 hours later. Basically it gets proofread, by someone who might catch a major error, might not, certainly won't catch a small error in nuance. And a lot of what we read these days is not filtered through this kind of scrutiny, and it does not contain that much reporting either, right? So a lot of what we read are, hot takes. They're informed, smart people who know a lot about a subject and have a context, but they didn't actually do any research for the piece they wrote, right? So they didn't, Trump makes an announcement about pulling troops out of Syria. They didn't go to Syria or call anybody or even spend 3 hours reading feeds in Arabic by people who are living in Syria. They just write an analytical take based on what they know, and that's a lot less work. It's a lot less tedious to be involved in, but the result is much less useful and less satisfying. I definitely think as a writer and as a reporter and a thinker, that labor intensive pain in the butt process we were talking about it's a much better one, and it has a secondary benefit, which is you produce less content.